My name is Beatrice Campbell. I'm 63 years old, widow, former hospice aide, mother of one, and apparently a charity case. That's what my daughter's new in-laws printed on my name tag at her wedding. Not mother of the bride, not even just Beatrice. Number. It said in bold black Sharpie right beneath the elegant gold script of my name, charity guest, mother, by default. They thought it was clever. I guess cruelty always is when dressed up in calligraphy. I had barely taken 3 steps into the vineyard venue, some high-end estate in Napa with gravel paths, rented chandeliers, and floral arrangements that probably cost more than my car, before I saw it. My place card perched on the linen-covered table like a trap. I froze. It wasn't just the words, it was the silence that followed, sharp and thick, when I picked it up and read it out loud. Under my breath, yes, but loud enough for their side of the family to catch it. They were watching, waiting. A few of them chuckled. One of the groom's aunts, dressed like she'd just stepped off a yacht, leaned over to whisper something to her husband. He didn't even bother hiding his grin. A young man in a velvet blazer, maybe a cousin, snorted and muttered, "Did they really let the cook in?" I wasn't the cook, but I had been. I'd done it all. Raised Chloe alone after her father passed, took night shifts to cover her college fees, made wine in our basement from bruised grapes just to keep the dream of my mother's winery alive. None of them knew that. None of them cared. And Chloe? My Chloe? She was across the garden, radiant in her ivory dress, posing for pictures with the groom's family like she belonged to them now. She looked happy, light, effortless, like someone who hadn't seen the placard with her mother's name and insult scribbled across it. But I knew better. She had seen it. I saw the flicker in her eyes when they called me over to sit down, the way she hesitated, just long enough for me to catch it. She looked away when I picked it up, didn't say a word, so I didn't either. I set the card back down, straightened the hem of my hand-sewn dress, and walked out. No drama, no confrontation, not even a goodbye. Because if dignity was the last thing I had left, I wasn't going to let them take that too. If you've ever been in a room where no one sees you except to laugh at your pain, you're not alone. Stories like this aren't just fiction. They're mirrors. Stay with me. This isn't the end. Not even close. I drove home in silence. No music, no tears. Just my hands on the wheel and the wind slipping through the half-open window of my decade-old sedan. I don't remember how long I sat in my driveway. I just remember the quiet, the kind that settles deep in your bones when you realize you were never invited, only tolerated. It wasn't until morning that my phone started buzzing. 29 missed messages, all from Owen, the groom, and his side of the family. It was just a joke. You left too early. We didn't mean it. Please don't make this a thing. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because by the time they realized what they'd done, the winery papers were already signed. The next morning at precisely 10:32 a.m., the deed to Campolora Estate, an $18 million property they once mocked as a backyard bottling garage, was legally and irrevocably transferred into my name. Public record. Sealed and stamped. They laughed at the name tag. But they didn't know who they were laughing at. They thought I was a forgotten woman, a placeholder in a story that no longer needed me. But I've been patient for a long time. And patience, as my mother used to say, is a quiet form of power, especially when you're holding the pen. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 29 messages, all from Owen and members of his family, some frantic, some apologetic, some trying to sound light, like it had all been some regrettable joke that got out of hand. We didn't mean anything by it. Please call back. Chloe's upset. Everyone's confused. Please come talk to us. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say. I left the phone face down on the kitchen counter, right beside the mug I'd used every morning for the past 10 years. The one with the faded red print that said, Campolora, bottled with grace. It had a small chip on the rim, just enough to notice, not enough to throw away. I filled the kettle, lit the burner. The morning light slipped in through the old lace curtain above the sink, casting soft shadows across the tile. Outside, the grapevine stood still, quiet, unbothered by the drama of the day before. And inside, I poured my tea and sat down at the small wooden table, just like I always did. No fanfare, no reaction, just me and the quiet, because I'd learned, over 63 years, that not every insult deserves a response. Sometimes the best thing you can do is sit still and let the noise fall apart on its own. I looked out the window and let my eyes follow the slope of the land. My mother's vines still stood just beyond the fence. My daughter used to chase butterflies between them in the spring, her hair tied up in a messy bow I could never quite get right. That land had carried us through more than people ever knew. It fed us when we couldn't afford groceries. It gave me purpose when the world had no use for women like me, widows who had spent their youth holding everyone else together. After my husband died, I nearly sold the whole place. Twice, in fact. But each time, I would stand by the cellar door, hand on the old brass latch, and remember his voice in that last winter. Whatever you do, Bea, don't let the girl grow up in bitterness. Let her rise with love, not revenge. So I stayed, worked, built something. Little by little, I made jam from bruised fruit and sold it at the local market. Took in mending jobs, baked pies for the church bake sale, cleaned houses, and for 6 long years I worked nights at the hospice, changing bedpans, reading psalms aloud to strangers who died, holding my hand because they had no one else. Every dollar went toward Chloe's future, toward keeping Campolora alive. Not so we could become rich, but so she'd always have something to stand on, roots that couldn't be pulled out by storms or smug in-laws with sharp tongues and colder hearts. The teacup was warm in my hands. I took a slow sip and let the stillness wrap around me like a shawl. I wasn't sad, exactly, just hollow, a different kind of tired. There's a fatigue that comes from labor, from doing and striving, and then there's the kind that settles in when you realize you've spent your whole life being useful and somehow ended up being treated like an afterthought. I set the mug down. The house was quiet, but not empty. Every corner still held the echoes of life. Chloe's laughter bouncing down the hallway as a child, the creak of the floorboards during late-night pacing when bills came due and answers didn't. Even the old grandfather clock in the living room had something to say. Tick-tock. A slow, measured rhythm that reminded me time had always moved whether I was ready or not. Then came the knock. Soft but firm. 3 taps. I didn't move at first. Let the sound hang in the air like a test I didn't know I was ready to take. Another knock, lighter this time. I rose from the chair slowly, my knees reminding me I wasn't 30 anymore. As I approached the door, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. Same woman as yesterday, but different. Not because something had changed on the outside, but because something had finally settled inside me. I opened the door. There she was. Chloe still in her rehearsal dinner dress, crumpled now, her hair no longer perfect. She held her shoes in one hand and a manila folder in the other. Her eyes were red-rimmed, jaw tight, but she didn't look away. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. Just 2 words, but everything about her face told me she hadn't come to explain or to ask for forgiveness. She'd come to do something more important. I stepped aside. She walked in, and I closed the door behind her. She didn't say anything at first, just walked through the door barefoot, her heels dangling from her right hand, a manila folder tucked under her left arm. The dress she wore to the rehearsal dinner the night before was wrinkled and sagging at the shoulders. Her makeup had worn off, leaving behind only smudges near the corners of her eyes. No jewelry, no veil, no ring. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like a woman who had been through war and had decided not to surrender. I motioned to the kitchen. She followed silently. We sat across from each other at the same old wooden table where I'd served her thousands of breakfasts, cut out spelling worksheets, helped her sew crooked Halloween costumes. I wondered for a brief moment if she remembered any of that, or if the world she'd built since college had erased it all. She set the folder down, didn't open it yet, just looked at her hands, red marks still visible from clutching the heels too tightly. Then she spoke. "I saw it," she said. Her voice was flat, almost emotionless, but the skin beneath her eyes was still damp. The place card. I saw it the night before, at the rehearsal dinner. It was already on the table. I didn't respond, just waited. I'd learned long ago that silence could hold space for the truth better than words ever could. She looked up at me finally. I should have said something. I know, but I needed to see it. I raised an eyebrow, not out of anger, just confusion. See what? She took a breath, shaky but controlled. If they would actually go through with it, if they would leave it there in front of all their friends, all their guests, if no one from Owen's side would say a damn thing, not even him. I blinked slowly. So you let it happen? I let it confirm what I already suspected. Her words landed soft but heavy, like the last drop of water before a dam gives way. She reached into her purse and pulled out the manila folder, laid it on the table and pushed it toward me. I opened it out of reflex, not really expecting to understand what I was looking at. But as I flipped through the first few pages, the shock set in. Transfer of controlling interest. Campalora Winery. Effective immediately. My name on every document. Not as co-signer, not as witness, as the sole owner. I looked up at her, stunned. What is this? Yours, she said simply. You're giving me the winery? I'm not giving you anything, Mom. I'm just undoing the lie. I shook my head, still trying to piece it together. But Campalora's been in your name since we had to restructure the debt 5 years ago. I thought, you thought I was just helping you hold it. She nodded. And I was. At first. But then I saw what they thought of it. The Drexlers, Owen's parents, his friends. They thought Campalora was a joke, some hobbyist garage label. Cute for a woman your age, Cynthia once said. I flinched, not because I hadn't heard that phrase before, but because I had, too many times, from too many people. Chloe went on, so I did what I had to. I stopped using my first name on legal filings, rebranded the label quietly under BC Reserve, started sourcing from other vineyards for blends, hired a branding consultant, shifted distribution toward boutique restaurants that value ethical, women-owned producers. You did all of that? She nodded again. For 2 years, under your name, I sat back in my chair trying to breathe. Why? Her answer came without pause. Because they'd never take me seriously. But they'd ignore you, and that gave me cover to build something they wouldn't see coming. Twist, the girl I thought had been swallowed by a world of white dresses and country club brunches, had been orchestrating her own quiet justice behind the scenes. Not in spite of me. For me. And why now? I asked. She looked me dead in the eye. Because yesterday made it clear that I couldn't protect you by blending in. I had to draw the line. Publicly, and Owen, she shrugged. He didn't know. Or maybe he didn't want to know. Either way, he watched them humiliate you and he did nothing. That told me everything I needed. The air between us settled. Not heavy anymore, just quiet. Steady. I ran my fingers over the corner of the folder. The paper was thick. Real. Legal. You're sure? I asked again, softer this time. Completely. And what do you want me to do with it? She smiled faintly. "Keep standing. That's all I've ever wanted you to do, and now you'll do it. As the woman whose name they'll have to read on every bottle they once laughed at." I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just reached across the table, took her hand, and nodded. For the first time in years, I saw not just my daughter, but the woman she'd become, and I was proud. I wasn't there when he read the messages I never sent back. I didn't see his face when Chloe disappeared from the reception without a word or when her bouquet hit the ground untouched. But I imagine he stood there frozen, too proud to chase after her, too stunned to understand what had just slipped through his fingers. Later, I heard from someone that he wandered out of the hotel lobby around midnight, his tie undone, his jacket slung over one shoulder like it weighed more than his future. No ride, no plan, just his shoes crunching across the gravel outside the Vineyard Resort, the silence chasing behind him. They said his phone had less than 2% battery left. No answer from Chloe, no response from me. I didn't need to imagine what he was thinking. I already knew. Maybe it started the night before the wedding. The rehearsal dinner was held under hanging string lights next to a long polished oak table surrounded by too many wine glasses and too few real conversations. Cynthia, Owen's mother, had leaned close to him and wrinkled her nose. "Is that homemade wine I smell?" she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "I guess some people can't tell when to stop bottling nostalgia." Her tone had that kind of practiced superiority that comes from always knowing which fork to use and never having to clean one. Someone laughed. Not me. Then a younger man, I forget his name, maybe one of the groomsmen, held up a place card and joked, "Hey, what if we labeled her charity guest? Might as well lean into it, right?" Laughter again. "And Owen?" He smiled. Not a big one. Not a laugh. But the kind of small, crooked grin that comes from wanting to fit in and not wanting to interrupt the people who paid for the venue. He didn't say the words, but he didn't stop them either. He just let the moment happen, like so many do. There's a word for that kind of silence. It's not cruelty. It's not malice. It's cowardice. And Owen wore it like a second skin. Later, he would tell himself it wasn't that serious, that he'd intended to fix it, that he didn't realize I would see the card, that Chloe would walk away, that families always have rough edges before they soften into acceptance. But deep down, even he knew that wasn't true. Because that kind of disrespect, it doesn't soften, it rots. Somewhere around 3 a.m, Owen ended up outside the Campalora sign, just the old wooden one my mother carved by hand 40 years ago, the one we never replaced, even after the rebranding. He stood in front of it for almost 15 minutes, people said, lit a cigarette, let it burn out between his fingers, didn't take a single puff. When someone from the hotel staff asked if he was okay, he said, "I thought we were building something real." But what kind of man builds something real on the backs of people he won't defend? There's a guilt that comes from doing wrong. And then there's the guilt that grows when you watch someone else be wronged, and you do nothing. Owen never yelled. He never mocked. But he stood there. He let it happen. And sometimes that's worse. That's what Chloe saw. Not the man who put a ring on her finger, but the man who stayed seated when a room turned cruel. The morning after the wedding that wasn't, I sat in the kitchen with Chloe while she signed over the winery to my name. In that silence, I thought about Owen. I didn't hate him, but I saw him clearly. A boy raised to value approval over accountability, trained to blend in, to stay pleasant, to stay quiet. And when the moment came to draw a line, he blinked instead. Would he do it differently if given the chance? Maybe. Maybe not. But that's the thing about moments that matter. You don't get to rehearse them. You either show up with your whole self or you vanish with your silence. It was late afternoon when the knock came again, not Chloe's this time. Heavier, uneven. the kind of knock that carries guilt before the door even opens. Chloe moved faster than I did. She pulled the door back, and there he was, Owen. His shirt wrinkled, his tie loosened, his hair looking like he'd dragged his hands through it a dozen times. He clutched his phone like it could shield him. His face was pale, but his words rushed out before either of us could speak. "Mrs. Campbell, please, I need to explain. I'm so sorry. I didn't know they'd actually put it on the card. It was supposed to be a joke, just a stupid joke. My parents—" He tripped over his own sentences, stumbling forward with excuses. "It wasn't me. I didn't mean it. I swear I had no idea how far it would go. I didn't move." Chloe stood next to me on the porch, arms folded, silent as stone. I studied him for a long moment. His chest was heaving, eyes darting from me to Chloe and back again. There was a time I might have felt pity for him, for a boy trying to hold up a family name heavier than his own spine. But that time was long gone. When his words ran dry, I finally asked the only question that mattered. "When you saw the card," I said, my voice steady, "what did you do?" He froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked down at the porch floorboards like the answer might be carved into the wood. "Nothing," I said for him. "You did nothing." The silence stretched so wide you could hear the birds in the vineyard behind the house. Owen's lips trembled as if he wanted to protest, but he didn't. He couldn't, because we all knew the truth. I turned without another word, walked back inside, and returned with a white envelope in my hand. Clean. Sealed. The paper still crisp from the morning's ink. I held it out to him. "Here," I said. He looked at me, confused. "What is this?" "The new distribution contract for Campolora," I replied. "Signed this morning. Exclusive rights with a regional restaurant chain. Your family's name isn't on it, and it never will be." His face drained of color. He didn't take the envelope, just stared at it as though touching it might burn. I slid it back into my hand, calm as ever. I don't need explanations. I don't need apologies. I only need one thing. He swallowed hard. "What's that?" "That they never laugh again." I let the words hang in the air, not shouted, not cruel, just final. Owen's shoulders sagged. His mouth opened like he wanted to argue, but the fight wasn't there. The excuses had dried up. All that remained was the weight of silence, the same silence he'd chosen when it counted. He glanced at Chloe, maybe searching for softness in her eyes. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just stood beside me, steady as a pillar. Finally, he nodded once, muttered something that might have been, "I'm sorry," and stepped back down the porch steps. The gravel crunched under his shoes as he walked away. Chloe and I stayed where we were, watching him retreat into the lengthening shadows of the evening. Neither of us spoke until he was gone. I let out a slow breath. My hand was still resting on the envelope, the weight of it far more than paper and ink. It was proof that dignity can't be erased with a Sharpie, proof that silence, when chosen with strength, speaks louder than excuses. I turned toward Chloe. She was already looking at me. There was no smile on her face, no tears, but her eyes carried something deeper, a mix of sorrow and pride, like she was seeing me for the first time all over again. She reached out, just slightly, and her hand brushed mine. A light squeeze. No words, no explanation. That was enough. We stood there together on the porch, the last sunlight settling over the vines, the quiet wrapping itself around us, not heavy this time, but whole. And in that silence, I realized something. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning. The air in the storage barn behind Campolora was thick with dust and silence. I hadn't stepped inside that space in years, not since the day we expanded the production facility and locked this old room for good. But today, I needed to breathe in the scent of what came before: fermented grapes, cracked cork, worn wood, and remember what it cost to build something that lasts. I flicked on the single yellow bulb overhead. The light buzzed once before humming steady, casting long shadows over shelves that still held remnants of the vineyard's first days. I moved slowly, fingers trailing over bottles lined like quiet soldiers, some still full, some long emptied, but all labeled with the original Campolora name in my mother's handwriting. Dust danced in the light. I reached for a bottle on the top shelf, batch 003, Winter Reserve, 1989, and wiped the glass clean with my sleeve. My reflection looked back at me, older and quieter than I remembered. I carried the bottle to the wooden table in the center of the room. As I set it down, the past arrived, unexpected and sharp. It was the night my husband died, the night the vineyard fell into my hands, along with the weight of 100 decisions I'd never wanted to make alone. I remember sitting on the edge of his hospital bed, the machines clicking around us. He was frail by then, eyes sunken, voice barely a breath, but his words carved through me like the edge of a pruning knife. "B," he said, "you're not just holding this together. You are this. You're the root, not the branch." I didn't understand it fully then. I was too tired, too afraid. All I could think about was Chloe, asleep on a cot in the hallway clutching her sketchbook. She was 9. She'd drawn the vineyard that morning, every row straight, every vine in bloom, even though it was January. I blinked, and I was back in the cabin we used to live in, a tiny place with peeling linoleum and a stove that rattled when the wind blew. I used to ride my bike to the market, a milk crate strapped to the back, collecting used glass bottles others had tossed. I cleaned them until they shone and reused them for small batch syrup we sold under the name Campbell's Gold. Not glamorous, but it got us through that winter. And all those years, my name wasn't on the deed, not because I wasn't worthy, but because I never asked. I told myself it didn't matter, that love and work and sacrifice didn't need signatures. But standing in that dusty barn, bottle in hand, I realized something I had refused to admit for decades. I had never claimed my own name. I had just kept giving. I turned toward the back corner of the room, to the old wooden cabinet my mother had kept locked for as long as I could remember. It had been hers, sturdy dark oak hand-carved by my grandfather. No one opened it after she passed, not even me. Until now. The key still hung on the rusted nail beside the frame. I took it down, its metal cold against my palm, and fit it into the lock. With a slow twist, the latch clicked open. Inside were 2 things, a faded linen pouch and a stack of yellowed papers tied with twine. I lifted the pouch first. Inside, a handful of dried lavender and a silver ring I hadn't seen since childhood, my mother's. She used to rub it like a worry stone. Then the papers. I untied the twine. At the top, in calligraphy I recognized instantly, was the title, Last Testament and Property Declaration, Elizabeth Campolora. My mother. As I flipped through the pages, my heart thudded. Deed after deed, parcel after parcel, all of it listed under one name, Beatrice Campbell. Me. Not my father, not my husband, not the family, just me. She had intended this land for me all along. I sank into the old wooden chair behind me. My hands trembled, but not from shock, from the overwhelming quiet of understanding. She had seen something I hadn't. She knew that being soft didn't mean being small, that being kind didn't mean disappearing. I pressed the documents to my chest, closed my eyes, and breathed in the lavender from the pouch. It smelled like the kitchen of my childhood, like the earth after harvest, like a woman who never raised her voice, but who was never, ever unheard. My mother left the vineyard in my name. Chloe had just returned it. But maybe it had never left me. Maybe it was I who had walked away from it, and now I was back. The light above me flickered once. I smiled faintly. Outside, the vines were swaying gently in the late afternoon breeze. It was time to replant what I had forgotten. Root first, like always. The sun was just starting to soften as Chloe and I walked through the vineyard side by side. Her heels clicked gently on the stone path while I let my boots sink into the soil, like they always had. She held a folder in one hand, thick with papers and small colored tabs, peeking out like flags of a quiet revolution. The vines were in their late bloom, clusters of fruit beginning to darken. Chloe reached out, brushed her fingers over a low-hanging bunch, then looked at me. Not the way a daughter looks at a mother, but the way one woman looks at another, who's carried something heavy for too long. "I don't need them to apologize," she said softly. "I just need them not to be able to do it again. To anyone." She stopped walking and handed me the folder. Inside, spreadsheets, equity charts, board resolutions. I blinked. "This isn't just distribution paperwork." "No," she replied. "It's a strategy." She walked on. I followed. For the last 2 years, I've been working with a few partners in the clean food startup space, women-led companies, mostly second-generation founders like me. We formed a coalition to control regional wine supply for high-end organic retailers. Her voice was steady, calm, but under it was the beat of something urgent. "Last quarter," she continued, "Owen's mother, Cynthia, approached one of our competitors. She wanted to cut us out and secure an exclusive bottling deal. It would have wiped Campalora off the shelves in 6 major cities I stopped. And she didn't know Campalora had that much leverage. She assumed we were still a mom-and-pop vineyard with rustic charm and no distribution muscle." A gust of wind swept through the vines. Chloe turned to me. What she didn't know was that I've been acquiring quiet equity in the food group she was negotiating with. Through a private investment fund. She paused. "The fund is in your name." I stared at her. "What?" "I used your credit, your legacy, your brand trust. Every silent hour you spent building this place into something respected. That became our leverage." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Just listened to the sound of bees, humming, and distant pruning shears clinking down the row. Chloe took a breath, her tone gentler now. "I know I should have told you sooner. But I needed to prove I could hold the weight first." She walked ahead, then turned back toward me again. "I didn't want revenge, Mom. That's not who you raised me to be, but I wanted power. Not to humiliate them, but to remove the seat they thought they were born into. The seat they never offered you." I nodded slowly. The words landed like soft stones in my chest. "And now?" I asked. "What happens now?" She held my gaze. "Now, they need Campalora to survive the merger. And they don't know yet that Campalora doesn't need them." That silence between us was deep and full. We kept walking. At the edge of the field where the old oak tree bent over the soil like a tired sentinel, I finally asked, "And what do you need from me?" Chloe's answer came without hesitation. "Your name and your presence." She turned toward me fully now. "They're not afraid of me, not really. I'm young, idealistic. They think they can wait me out, but you..." She stepped closer. "You are the woman who raised me in a broken cabin and built a vineyard from borrowed glass and borrowed hope. You are the one who never shouted, never asked for applause, never stepped on anyone to rise. That terrifies them, because there's nothing they can take from you, and nothing you need from them." My throat tightened. She continued, softer now. "I watched you all those years, Mom. And I used to wonder if silence meant weakness. But now I know. It means patience. And that's what they've never learned to handle." I looked at her, really looked, and saw not just my daughter, but my legacy walking beside me. Not the rows of vines, not the buildings, but this, her clarity, her quiet precision, the kind of strength that waits, that doesn't need to prove itself, that simply is. I reached out, gently touched her arm. "You have what you need," I said. "Use my name." Her eyes brimmed for a moment, but didn't spill. Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. "I used to wish you'd fight louder, Mom. That you'd slam doors, throw plates, demand your seat. But now I know. The way you fight, it makes people live with what they did." I smiled. It was small, but it rooted deep. "They remember longer that way," I said. She nodded. As we reached the house again, the light beginning to slant across the hills, Chloe looked over her shoulder at the vines. "Funny," she said. "They always told me the best harvest comes from the soil that struggled most." I laughed under my breath. Then we must be drowning in gold. I've never liked city buildings, that smell of filtered air and recycled ambition. They all feel the same. Glass walls, cold lighting, too many clocks ticking too loud. But that morning, as I stepped into the boardroom of Greenridge Holdings in my olive green suit and low heels, I didn't feel out of place. I didn't feel intimidated. I felt quiet. Chloe walked beside me in a cream blouse and black slacks, carrying nothing but a sleek folder. No lawyers, no assistant, no rehearsed speech, just her and I, and an awareness that today wasn't about confrontation. It was about presence. The boardroom was modern, sterile, and already full of people. Executives in dark suits with overpriced watches, legal aides typing behind laptops. A few familiar faces turned when we entered, some out of recognition, most out of confusion. There was no ceremony, no formal greeting. Just a long table, a row of chairs on each side, and a single seat left conspicuously empty in the middle, the one across from Cynthia. She was already seated, draped in a charcoal blazer with a pearl brooch at her collar. Her armor, I suppose. Beside her sat her husband Richard, slightly slouched, eyes shifting as Chloe and I moved to our seats. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Chloe stood, placed her folder on the table, and began. "Thank you all for joining. I'll be brief." Her voice was calm, professional, but underneath, cutting steel. "We're here to formally address a series of conflicts of interest and breaches of fiduciary responsibility involving Greenridge Holdings' wine distribution practices, specifically those linked to the pending acquisition of Madeira Cellars and the attempted exclusion of Campalora Winery from region-exclusive supply chains, a shuffle of papers." A few raised brows. Cynthia narrowed her eyes. Chloe clicked a remote, and the screen behind her lit up with pie charts, emails, shipping records, names, dates, pricing discrepancies. "For the past 14 months, Chloe continued, select executives within Greenridge, primarily those with familial stakes, have actively devalued boutique wineries while inflating the purchasing margins of their own distribution channels. This has misled shareholders, manipulated product authenticity, and harmed the transparency promised to conscious consumers." Someone coughed. A pen tapped nervously. "And now," Chloe said, turning to Cynthia's side of the table, "they face exposure, legal risk, and potential dissolution of multiple sourcing contracts, unless remedial measures are taken." Richard's lips parted, but he said nothing. Cynthia's chin lifted, a rehearsed calm settling over her like fog. "You have no grounds to accuse us," she said. "You're not even on the board." Chloe didn't flinch. She simply gestured to the chair in the middle. "That's true," she said, "but she is." All eyes turned to me. Cynthia blinked. "What is this?" "The investment fund controlling 28.7% of your Series B equity," Chloe replied, "has consolidated voting rights to its founding principal, Beatrice Campbell." A beat of silence. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Cynthia stood abruptly, her voice raised just enough to crack. "She can't sit there. She's not qualified. She's just—" She stopped herself. Everyone in the room waited for the rest, but it didn't come. So I rose from my seat, slowly, not dramatically, just deliberately, and I looked straight at her. "I'm the woman your family once labeled a charity case," I said. I stepped around the table, walked toward the empty chair. I'm the one who built a vineyard from nothing but cracked hands and morning frost, the one who raised her daughter while cleaning hospital floors and reusing corks. My fingers touched the chair's leather back. And I'm the one you thought would never be in this room. Cynthia's face tightened. Her husband turned away. I looked around the table, men and women with numbers in their heads and power in their pens. I'm not here to threaten you, I said, or to grandstand. I'm here because this seat was always within reach. You just hoped I'd never try. Then I sat. I didn't call a vote. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to, because the moment I settled into that chair, I wasn't asking for permission. I was simply taking up the space I'd earned, and the room knew it. Across from me, Chloe remained standing, her hands still, her gaze steady. She didn't smile, but she didn't have to. She had moved the pieces, framed the game, then stepped back to let the silence speak. A silence that echoed louder than any applause. From the kitchen window of the winery's guest house, I saw him standing near the edge of the vineyard. Owen, in a button shirt too crisp for this kind of air. He looked out of place, not just because of the dirt road beneath, his polished shoes, but because of the way he held himself, like someone searching for the right moment to turn back. I didn't call Chloe. I didn't need to. She must have seen him too. She didn't rush. She walked slowly down the porch steps, her hair loosely tied, face bare. Her hands were in her cardigan pockets. The wind tugged at the hem of her skirt. Evening light fell soft across the vines. Owen turned when he heard the door click shut behind her. "Hi," he said. She nodded. "Hi." There was no tension, just an old ache hanging between them, unspoken but familiar. "I didn't want to show up unannounced," he began, "but I wasn't sure you'd reply if I called." Chloe didn't answer. She let him speak. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. Out loud, she stayed still. "I should have done something," Owen said, "when I saw the name tag." "Your mom?" She looked right at me, and I looked away. His voice cracked slightly. "I knew it was wrong. I knew it wasn't funny. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't confused. I just didn't want to make a scene or make my mom upset." He paused, his fists clenched at his sides. "I was a coward." Chloe's expression didn't change. Her voice was calm when she finally spoke. "It's not that you were a coward, Owen," she said. "It's that you were more afraid of upsetting your mother than hurting someone else." Owen flinched. She hadn't said it to wound him, just to name it. He pulled something from his back pocket, an envelope folded once. "I wrote her a letter. Your mom. It's not much. It's not enough. But I didn't know how else to say what I should have said that night." He held it out. Chloe hesitated, then took it. "I'll give it to her," she said. "Maybe." Owen nodded. "That's fair." The breeze rustled the vines. Neither of them moved. "We had something, didn't we?" he asked softly. Chloe looked down at the envelope in her hand, then up at him. "We did," she said, "but love isn't enough if you can't protect it." Her voice didn't tremble. There was no bitterness in it, only a clarity that had been earned. "If you can't speak up when it's easy," she continued, "you won't survive the moments when it's hard." Owen blinked rapidly. "I wish I had done better." "I know," Chloe said. He stepped back, hesitating. "So that's it?" She smiled faintly, not the kind that invites hope, but the kind that honors what used to be. "I don't hate you, Owen," she said, "but I've learned to choose people who show up. Not just the ones who mean well." Then she turned and walked back toward the porch, the wind catching strands of her hair as the sun slipped lower on the horizon. Owen stood alone, and I, from behind the kitchen curtain, felt no anger, no victory, only peace. Because my daughter had grown into a woman who didn't need revenge to feel whole, just the courage to walk away from anything that didn't honor her name. The warehouse smelled of oak and lavender oil. A long wooden table ran the length of the room, lined with mismatched chairs. Some of the women sat with clipboards, others with calloused hands resting on warm mugs of tea. No suits, no ties, just cotton shirts, denim, silver hair, and eyes that had seen too much of the world, and yet still showed up. I stood at the head of the table, not because I demanded to, but because this time I was asked to. Campalora, I began, isn't just a vineyard anymore. It's going to be a beginning. Chloe sat beside me, her laptop open, the new brand deck displayed on a projector against the concrete wall. The old slogan, "Tradition runs in the family," had been slashed through in red. Below it, a new line appeared, printed in bold, "Begin again." At any age, there was a soft murmur of agreement, a few nods, and one woman, Marta, who had recently left a decades-long marriage, wiped her eyes and smiled. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a pity project. It was infrastructure, purpose, a chance for women who'd been told too many times they were too old, too late, or too much trouble. They weren't here because they had nowhere else to go. They were here because they still had more to give. We had converted the back building, where the original barrels were once stored, into a fermentation and training room. There were now hands-on courses, grape selection, barrel management, fermentation timing, marketing for boutique wine, even e-commerce for those who wanted to build their own labels someday. I watched as Linda, 62, asked Chloe how to install a Shopify plugin. The girl who once cried when she scraped her knee was now walking women through digital analytics. I didn't cry, but I could have. After the meeting, Chloe and I stayed behind to clean up. The room was quiet again. Dust swirled in golden beams from the high windows. She turned to me while folding a whiteboard tripod. "I still can't believe they printed that on your name tag," she said suddenly. "Charity guest." I met her eyes. "It's just a piece of paper." Chloe looked down, brushing crumbs off the table. "Still, I wish I had ripped it off before anyone saw it." I set down a stack of ceramic mugs. "You did something better. You made sure the only names printed now are chosen by the women who own them." She smiled, but something lingered. After a pause, she asked quietly, "If you had the chance, would you forgive them?" Her question didn't shock me. I'd known it would come, sooner or later. Chloe had always been the type to seek closure, not for peace with others, but for peace with herself. I pulled out a chair and sat down. The room echoed with the soft creak of wood beneath me. "Yes," I said, "I would forgive." She looked up, surprised. "You would?" I nodded. "But forgiving doesn't mean inviting them back." She said nothing. Let that sink in. "Forgiveness," I continued, "is about me, not them. It's about not carrying their cruelty in my bones anymore. I don't want bitterness aging in me like spoiled wine." Chloe sat across from me, hands clasped together, listening. "I won't forget what they did," I said, "but I won't let it define how I move forward, or who sits at my table." We were quiet for a moment. Outside, the sun had begun to drop below the horizon. The grapevines glowed like gold-threaded silk. "I used to think healing meant things going back to how they were," Chloe said softly. I shook my head. "Healing means building something stronger out of what broke and making sure no one else has to break the same way again." She reached out, placed her hand over mine. "You're not just my mother," she said. "You're the root." I smiled, gently squeezing her fingers. "Then let's make sure this vineyard never grows rotten branches again." The first morning of harvest came with a crisp wind. I stood at the edge of the Campalora vineyard, boots damp with dew, fingers curled around a worn notebook. The sun was still low, casting a golden sheen over the rows of vines. The grapes were ready, deep purple, heavy, sweet with late summer. I remembered standing in this very spot 20 years ago, alone, arms trembling under the weight of wooden crates. No gloves, no help, only the sound of my own breathing and the rustle of leaves in the wind. But today, I wasn't alone. Laughter rippled through the vineyard like a soft current. Dozens of women, most of them older than 40, many closer to 60, walked between the rows. Each carried a basket, their hands stained red with crushed grape skins, their voices rising with jokes and inside stories shared over morning coffee. They moved like they belonged here, not as visitors, not as replacements, as women finally reclaiming space that should have been theirs all along. Marta, the one who once didn't know how to prune a vine from a dead branch, now led a small team of 4, confidently instructing on sugar content and harvest timing. Grace, who had lost her job after 30 years in food service, now tracked fermentation logs better than any consultant I'd ever hired. They came here unsure, shoulders hunched. Now they stood tall. A woman's voice called out behind me, "Beatrice!" I turned. It was Marjorie, the one with the snow-white bun and a cane she rarely used anymore. She walked slowly, but proudly, basket full. "I just wanted to say, thank you," she said, her voice low. I smiled, about to brush it off with the usual modesty, but she placed a firm hand on my arm. "No," she said, eyes glassy. "You don't understand. I was living in my sister's basement. My son told me I was dead weight, that he had a family now." I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't speak. Marjorie looked down at her hands. "Today I filled 6 crates. They said I handled the press better than the new girls." "You did," I said quietly. She nodded, then softer. "This morning, for the first time in years, I woke up feeling like I mattered." A gust of wind passed between us. It carried the scent of crushed grapes and soil, earthy, alive, full of quiet things growing beneath the surface. Marjorie walked away, shoulders straighter than when she'd arrived her first day. I stayed there for a long while, letting the scene soak in. The land was still the same, the soil hadn't changed, but the energy, it was different now. The vineyard no longer echoed with loneliness, it buzzed with rebirth. Campalora wasn't just producing wine anymore, it was producing dignity. Every row picked was a choice to keep going. Every basket filled was proof that someone who'd been discarded still had value, still had strength, still had purpose. I never made speeches, but if I did, I would have told them this: you are not too late. You are not broken. You are not a burden. You are needed. Not for what you were, but for who you are, right now. Instead, I just walked the rows, offered a nod here, a hand there, a gentle touch on the shoulder when someone seemed tired, and when no one was watching, I crouched beside a low vine. I pulled a single grape from its cluster, rolled it between my fingers, pressed it to my lips. It was sweet, not just ripe, but patient. The kind of sweetness that only comes when you've waited, when you've endured storms and heat and pruning, when you've been almost forgotten, but not completely. I stood again. The sky above had shifted, clearer now, more certain. Behind me, laughter burst out again. A woman sang a song in Spanish. Someone clapped offbeat. Chloe's voice rang out, calling for one more crate before the truck arrived. I looked back at the house in the distance. Once, it had been a place of quiet survival. Now, it was a place of creation. And me? I was no longer just the woman who stayed silent when they laughed at my name tag. I was no longer just Mom, I was Beatrice Campbell. And this vineyard? It no longer needed to carry the name of someone else's legacy. It was ours now. And the wind agreed. I was folding tea towels in the kitchen when I heard the gate creak. Campalora had grown quieter since harvest, but I could feel a shift in the air the moment he stepped in, different from the dry autumn breeze. He walked slowly up the stone path, wearing jeans, a faded gray shirt, no wedding ring, no suit, no smirk, just Owen. He held something in his hand, a crumpled envelope aged at the corners. I opened the door before he could knock. We didn't speak for a moment. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, eyes hollow, shoulders lower than I remembered. This wasn't the same young man who'd once toasted champagne without glancing at the woman who raised his bride. "Would you like to come in?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. The kitchen was warm. I'd just taken out a loaf of bread. Cinnamon and nutmeg filled the air, scents from a time before anyone wore titles. He sat across from me at the small table, the one with the uneven leg. I poured him tea. He didn't touch it. After a long silence, he spoke. "I lost everything." I waited. My parents stopped speaking to each other. My mother, well, you probably know. The board voted her out. She still doesn't believe it happened. His voice cracked. She says I betrayed her. He looked down at the envelope in his hand. "I found this again," he said. "It's the letter I wrote to you." I didn't give it to Chloe like I promised. I wasn't ready to face what I had done, or failed to do. He pushed it across the table. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he said, almost whispering. I wanted to say I finally understand what it feels like. To be seen as disposable. I didn't touch the letter. I just looked at him. For a long moment he sat under that gaze, waiting for anger or judgment or pity, but I offered none of those. Instead, I said quietly, "The important thing isn't what you've lost. It's what you've learned. If you truly want to begin again, start where no one can lift you but yourself." He nodded, a deep, quiet gesture. No excuses, no promises, just understanding. Then he stood. He didn't ask for anything else, and I never saw him again. But in that kitchen, as the light slanted across the table and the scent of bread lingered in the air, something unspoken passed between us. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, just peace. It was a cloudy morning when Chloe asked if I'd come. The event was at a local university, business department, lecture series titled Women in Strategy. Chloe was invited as the keynote speaker. I offered to wait outside, but she insisted. So I came, sat in the front row, wore a simple gray coat and the same leather shoes I'd worn the day Campalora reopened. The auditorium was modern, all sleek glass and steel. Students filtered in, most holding tablets or laptops. The air was thick with coffee and nerves. Chloe stepped onto the stage without notes. She didn't need them. She stood calm, composed, a subtle strength wrapped in silk, hair in a low bun, no jewelry, only her voice. The title of her talk was Silent Strategies, Patience as Power. I smiled. She began by recounting a case study, neutral tone, no names. It was our story, of course. Disguised in charts and timelines, about a small winery facing systemic exclusion, about partners who underestimated the wrong woman, about a shift not through confrontation, but through endurance and planning. "They expected us to ask for a seat," Chloe said. "We built the table." Students leaned forward. Then came the Q&A. A young woman in the back stood up, a little shaky. "Who," she asked, "has influenced your strategy the most?" Chloe paused, then slowly she looked down into the front row. At me. "My mother," she said. "She taught me that silence isn't weakness. It's timing. That not every war is won by shouting. Some are won by planting seeds and waiting, and when it's time, that quiet can shake more than noise ever could." A hush fell over the room, then a wave of applause. A camera turned in my direction. I didn't wave, didn't stand, just bowed my head slightly. That was enough. Recognition doesn't always need spotlight. Sometimes it comes in the way your child says your name without saying it. After the event, Chloe took my arm as we walked to the car. "They want to put it online," she said, smiling. "The whole speech." "Good," I said. "You're not mad I told them about you?" No. She was quiet a moment. Then, do you ever miss being unknown? I looked at her. My daughter, the strategist. The girl who once brought home a stray cat just because it looked lonely. No, I said, because being known, truly known, isn't the same as being seen. And now, at last, I was both. We came early just as the fog was lifting off the hills. The workers had already started drilling. Chloe and I stood side by side in front of the Campalora gate, sipping coffee from matching tin mugs. The new wooden sign was still wrapped in cloth. I could hear hammers, ladders shifting, birds chattering in the olive trees nearby. Are you nervous? Chloe asked. No. Not even a little? I looked at her. When you've had people mispronounce your name for years, having it carved in oak doesn't scare you. She laughed. The cloth dropped, and there it was, Campalora Winery Beatrice Campbell. Trust building, second chances. I stared at the lettering. Simple. Bold. No gold foil. No flourish. Just my name, and a purpose. Chloe stepped closer. You once told me you had nothing to leave behind. I nodded. But you gave me everything, she said. Not money. Not fame. You gave me the strength to start again. I didn't cry. Not that day. But something inside me unknotted. All those years of scraping together coins, of washing bottles by hand, of listening to people ask, "Where's your husband?" as if I were a placeholder. It all led here. One of the workers stepped down from the ladder and held something out. A wooden plank, rough, splintered. Faded letters burned into the surface. Charity case. It was the original wedding name tag. Someone had saved it. Or maybe fate had. Chloe took it without a word, walked to the nearby fire barrel, dropped it in. We watched it burn, not with hatred, just release. As the flames died down, I placed a hand on the new sign, not to possess it, just to feel it. To feel that I belonged, that I'd always belonged. And now, no one could say otherwise. The house had gone still again. It was one of those quiet nights that reminded me of the early years. No music, no noise from upstairs, no ticking clock on the wall, just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood settling into silence. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers trailing over the smooth glass of a wine bottle. The label shimmered under the low light. B.C. Reserve. Patience in silence. My initials, but not just mine. They belonged to every woman who'd ever been told to wait her turn, to stay quiet, to accept less. The wine was bold, not sweet, not apologetic. It held depth, like the years we carry without telling anyone how heavy they are. I heard soft footsteps, then the door eased open. Chloe entered, holding 2 glasses. She didn't say anything, just set them down and pulled out the chair across from me. Her eyes were tired, but not from sorrow, from doing, from building. We poured slowly. The sound of the wine filling the glasses was the only sound between us. There were no guests, no cameras, no applause, just a mother and daughter sitting at the same table where, decades ago, I'd cried in silence after being denied alone, where I'd stitched broken buttons back onto Chloe's coat after she'd outgrown it, where I'd once sat with my palms open, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. Chloe raised her glass halfway. "To quiet things," she said. I smiled and clinked mine against hers. We sipped. It was rich, slightly dry. It tasted like waiting, like soil, like a long breath held through the storm. Chloe set her glass down and looked at me. "Do you feel happy, Mom?" Her question wasn't casual. It was wrapped in years, in weddings and name tags and empty chairs. I looked around the room, the same worn cabinets, the same cracked ceramic vase by the window, nothing glamorous, nothing grand, but mine, all of it, even the silence. "Happiness," I said slowly, "isn't being applauded. It's when no one else gets to define your worth but you." She didn't speak, but I could tell she understood. We sat there for a while, sipping slowly. No phones, no plans, just presence. It wasn't a celebration. It was a reclamation. Later, I stood and walked out to the porch. The vineyard spread before me, rows upon rows swaying gently in the night breeze. The moon had risen full and quiet, casting silver across the leaves. I breathed in the air, cool, clean, and familiar. Once, I used to stand out here and wonder if all my giving had gone unnoticed, if patience was just another name for being forgotten. But now I knew better. Patience isn't silence, it's strategy, it's legacy. I sat on the old bench beneath the trellis. The wood creaked, but it held me, just like it always had. I didn't need to say anything, not anymore. The world had already heard enough noise. Let it hear the quiet now. Let it see what a woman can build when she's done being dismissed. Let it learn that sometimes healing doesn't arrive in fury or flame, but in the steady hands of a woman who waited and then chose. Above the vineyard, a breeze stirred the leaves like whispers, and in that quiet, I let go of needing to be understood. I had become the understanding. Not revenge, resolution. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today, wherever you are. We hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.